royal family. You're going to work for the firm. The firm has strict rules, and anybody who breaks them, you're out.
When Prince William married Catherine Middleton, a commoner whose mother once worked as an airline stewardess, the couple seemed ready to usher in a less stuffy, more egalitarian era of monarchy.
One of the statements that the palace put out was that life would go back to being very ordinary for them.
After all the pomp and ceremony, the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge planned to say farewell to the ladies-in-waiting, liveried coachmen, footmen, valets, and butlers. The newlyweds would return to Williams Air Base in Wales. In a farmhouse adjoining this field, they live the simple life, says one of Britain's most widely read royal columnists.
They have just one housekeeper in Anglesey. It's Kate that puts the garbage out, it's Kate that goes shopping, it's Kate that does most of the cooking.
The intensely private William likes it this way. As a boy, he witnessed his parents' marriage disintegrate in public, as servants did what they always do in British farces, blab about their masters.
By reducing his number of key staff, he keeps his secrets much tighter.
But the farmhouse in Wales will be replaced by plusher surroundings this year, when the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge return to London to begin their royal duties.
When they move into Kensington Palace, they'll need more valets, they'll need butlers, they'll need nannies, they'll need a chef.
Keeping their intimate moments to themselves won't be easy for Kate and William if they pay their staff in the meager House of Windsor tradition. Penny pinching is a bad way to keep servants loyal, says a prominent palace observer.
There is the risk that because they don't have much money, they see the way to make a quick buck and sell a story to a journalist.
To stop the flow of sensational headlines, the Windsors have tightened the screws on their staff with confidentiality agreements and government legislation.
Everything that they are privy to is to remain absolutely confidential. And if they do discuss it with a third party, well, they are actually in breach of the Official Secrets Act, which could lead to imprisonment.
Nobody knows the risks and rewards of getting close to the royals better than former palace butler Paul Burrell.
This is spring in England.
Now a flower shop owner near the Welsh border, Burrell spent 21 years with his royal masters.
I've looked after two of the world's most inspirational and unique human beings, Queen Elizabeth II and Princess Diana. What a lucky man I've been. Have a good day.
Yeah.
Thank you.
From Her Majesty's personal footman to butler to the Princess of Wales, Burrell did and saw it all.
What about the umbrella palms? They're nice.
In the last 7 years of her life, few people were closer to Princess Diana.
I was much more than a butler. I was a dresser at times. I was her driver, her policeman, her confidant, her go-between. I was all those things, but that's what you are. I was just there.
Burrell, like many of his fellow servants, comes from the humblest of backgrounds. He grew up in the tiny coal mining community of Grassmore, where his father was a truck driver and the family lived in this 2-bedroom home. Dreaming of better things, he took a college catering course and applied to the palace for work. He was hired as a footman when he was just 18.
It's not easy arriving at Buckingham Palace from the north of England, from a humble 2-up, 2-down home into the most famous residence in the land. I was a nervous wreck. I remember going to sleep the first night in my new room at Buckingham Palace. Stark, with just a Victorian bed, a wardrobe, and a sink in the corner of the room. But you know what? The most amazing view, right down the Mall, past the Victoria Monument towards Admiralty Arch. I lie in bed at night, pinching myself, looking up at my new, neatly pressed uniform, thinking, is this real? Is this my life? What's going to happen to me now?
A lot would happen to Burrell, and a lot of it wasn't good. But his early years as personal footman to the Queen were among his best. Amidst the splendor of her palaces and castles, few people had a better view of the monarch.
Every day, from the moment she woke up to the moment she went to bed, I was with her.
So were many other palace servants on call around the clock for Her Majesty.
She has a housemaid who comes in first thing in the morning, carries the bone china pot of tea for the Queen and some biscuits for her.
BBC News at 6 o'clock.
And they have a little radio, Robert's radio, on the side of the bed. She will switch that on, and the Queen likes to hear the news and the political programmes.
Then it's time to run exactly 7 inches of water into the royal tub, says an author who's written whole books on the minutiae of palace life.
They test the water with a wooden encased thermometer, and it has to be comparatively cool.
More than 300 people work full-time in Buckingham Palace, above and below stairs. Only about a dozen have access to the Queen.
It is one of the very, very few households in the world where you still have a system that's barely changed over the centuries.
Upstairs staff include well-paid private secretaries, ladies-in-waiting who work for nothing, and the Queen's financial manager, who draws the largest salary of nearly $300,000. Downstairs servants, like the coffee room maids and porters, get meager wages, unlike a far grander person who rules the kitchen.
The royal chef is a law unto himself, and he himself has got brigades and brigades of cooks, scullery maids, and goodness knows what.
The Grenadier Guards look like they're protecting the monarch, but their guns aren't loaded. An elite squad of armed Scotland Yard officers does the job. Among the trusted few in the Queen's circle, the young footman Burrell was an expert at keeping Her Majesty happy.
You learn body language, you learn moods. I knew what the Queen wanted before she asked for it. To serve to the best of your ability, you have to know what they want before they ask for it. It's a golden rule. Be there before they ask.
The palace kitchens pull out all the stops for state banquets, but otherwise keep it simple for the Queen. Her Majesty, says a former royal chef of 22 years, sees food merely as a way to stay alive.
It certainly wasn't what Gordon Ramsay would be knocking out, with flavours of fennel and lavender sort of thing.
One of the biggest challenges for any of the Queen's staff is coping with her closest companions.
They are universally loathed because these corgis are not fully house-trained. So the footman and the housemaids have to go around with a supply of soda water and blotting paper because the corgis do whatever corgis want to do wherever they want to do it. And over priceless carpets and furniture.
Burrell scored points with Her Majesty by being astute enough to get on famously with her dogs.
I learned very quickly to like corgis. I would stuff a sausage or a pork chop into the pocket of my tailcoat. You know, you can become very friendly with corgis with concealed food in your pockets.
Getting along with the master of the household was far less easy.
Prince Philip's temper is legendary. He runs the royal firm with an iron rod. I've seen majors and generals come out of Prince Philip's room in tears.
The Queen has a softer approach and a sense of humor, which showed when heavy rain threatened the funeral of the family's least favorite in-law, Wallis Simpson.
And I said, "Well, Your Majesty, I'm afraid the grave's waterlogged." She said, "Oh dear." She said, "We'd better bail it out, otherwise we'll be launching her, not burying her."
After 9 years of outstanding service to the monarch, Footman Burrell was promoted to butler to Charles and Diana in 1987. The Prince of Wales' household is lavish, and he's famously difficult to please.
Prince Charles said to his valet, "Why aren't those cufflinks here?" He said, "Oh, I didn't know you wanted them, sir. They're down at Highgrove. A round trip of 200 miles. They sent a footman." When he came back with them, Charles had changed his mind and went to him for another pair.
The Prince of Wales has grown up in such a privileged lifestyle that he doesn't have mechanics to choose for himself anymore. Everything is done for him. His pajamas are pressed every morning so that they don't have creases in them for the next day. His shoelaces are pressed flat with an iron. His underwear is folded in a certain way. The bath towel has to be placed in a certain fashion. The bath plug has to be in a certain position. The water temperature has to be just tepid and only half full. Prince Charles does have his valet squeeze 1 inch of toothpaste onto his toothbrush every morning. If anyone gets anything wrong, everybody is scolded. On one occasion, he rang me from his library and he said, "Oh, Paul, a letter from the Queen seems to have fallen into my waste paper bin. Would you pick it out?" The waste paper bin was there. He was sat there. I had to bend down into the paper bin and pick out the letter, put it back on his desk. "Will that be all, Your Royal Highness?" "Yes, thank you very much." It was beneath him to stoop and forage through his own waste paper bin.
No task, it seems, is too menial for the royal servant. A prominent British human rights activist questions the Windsors' motives for employing legions of staff.
Is it because they think that without this vast retinue of servants, the public would somehow think that they were mere mortals? Is it because they just regard it as their birthright to have people wait on them day and night? Is it because without them they wouldn't feel royal?
When royal babies arrive, so do the nurses and nannies. The Windsors leave diaper duty and sleepless nights to the staff, who sometimes form intimate, almost parental bonds with their charges. Like Elizabeth II's own nanny, Marion Crawford, who took care of the future monarch and her sister for 17 years.
The Queen was devoted to her, as was Princess Margaret, but she made the mistake of contributing to a very small, limited circulation book about bringing up the young princesses, and she was struck off for good. Unforgiving is the response of the palace.
The young Prince Charles was pampered by nurses and nannies too, but only rarely by his mother, who was absent on his first 3 birthdays. Nanny Mabel Anderson filled the gap. Charles later described his beloved Mipsy as a haven of security in a lonely childhood. When the Princess of Wales gave birth to William, she dreamed of being a different kind of royal mother.
She wanted to raise her babies herself, certainly feed them herself.
But Diana was persuaded to hire nanny Barbara Barnes and took it badly when William ended up adoring her.
There was always a side of Diana that was rather jealous of the nannies and the relationships that they subsequently struck up with her children.
Diana fired Barnes when William was barely 4. But years later, the princess was to have far worse problems with a nanny she thought appropriated her children and seduced her husband. Relationships between royals and servants are often built on a lifetime of intimacy that can end in disappointment and betrayal. The notoriously extravagant Queen Mother had 100 servants at Clarence House. None was more important to her than William Talon, a shopkeeper's son from Coventry, who served her for nearly 50 years. The steward and page of the backstairs was a kind of powerful head butler who became known as Backstairs Billy.
He was a sort of impresario in the household. He said my job was to keep her smiling.
A heavy drinker himself, Billy understood the needs of a queen partial to gin and lots of champagne. Clarence House was famous for its lavish, boozy parties, attracting the cream of London high society. The witty and flamboyant Billy was famous for keeping the party going, says a biographer of the royal family.
Somebody once said of him, no point putting your hand over the glass, he pours it through the fingers. He was a wizard with a drink.
Billy had his eye on a private residence for himself right at the entrance to Clarence House. The Queen Mother was quick to oblige. "I have spoken to the Queen about the little house," she wrote her servant in October 1984, "and I am sure that something can be arranged." The Queen Mother showered Billy with gifts and mementos, and occasionally she would dance with him.
It's trivial and tedious to suggest even that the Queen Mother was sort of in any remote way in love with William. He was sort of almost a part of the family, but at a certain level. It's not friendship as such.
Whatever her feelings, the aging dowager tolerated Billy's overtly gay relationship with fellow servant Reg Wilcock and teased the two of them when calling for a drink.
Will you old queens up there come down and serve this old queen down here, because I'd like a gin and tonic.
Having the ear of the boss gave Billy enormous power in Clarence House, and he lorded it over his fellow servants with impunity.
One of our jobs was to water the plants and sweep up any leaves. Once we'd done that, William would go behind us and shake the tree again to make more leaves come off it, so it would look as though the job hadn't been done. And then he would then come in and sort of have a go at everybody about it.
Billy also invited young male staff he fancied back to his lodge at night for drinks.
I heard from footmen that had since left that they had done things with William just to keep him happy, and they did regret it very much.
Sexual shenanigans were compounded by common theft as Billy and his partner prepared in style for their days off.
William and Reg every weekend would help themselves to all the food and the wines in the cellars and take it home to Reg's Kennington flat. And that happened every single weekend, and everybody knew it happened.
Staff who hated Billy rejoiced when a story hit the papers that he brought a male prostitute with a long criminal record onto the premises.
Senior house elf thought, we've got him now. Then the Queen Mother said, wasn't it nice of him to invite that young man in when it was raining so hard that night? Whoops. They had to stop. And on one other occasion, when they really thought they could get rid of him, she called them in and she said, your jobs are negotiable, his is not.
Like Billy, butler Paul Burrell was to become a non-negotiable to his mistress Diana by dedicating his life to her.
The princess came first, remember, not my wife, not my children. The princess came first.
Lady Diana's arrival in the royal family blew some of the cobwebs out of the Windsor's stuffy Edwardian traditions. Her relationships with servants were far less formal than protocol dictated, says a journalist who's written half a dozen books on the monarchy.
She shocked them in many ways when she first turned up on the scene by going into the kitchen, kicking off her shoes, pouring out a glass of wine and chatting with them whilst they were preparing the food. Now that has been unheard of, and in fact Prince Charles frowned upon it. But Diana didn't care. She was somebody who was able to mix with anybody, transcend class.
She would actually call people by their first names. And Charles found this very strange.
No one served Diana at closer quarters than Ken Wharf. The officer from Scotland Yard's elite protection squad shadowed the princess day and night, gun at the ready.
There are a lot of fixated people out there. We would say in the olden days, nutters. Can't always plan for that sort of attack. The worst case scenario, of course, is an assassination.
Diana once said to me, would you take a bullet from me? I said, well, ma'am, of course I would, but I prefer not to. But let's don't get into a situation where we have to bring that about. The protection officer needs to strike up that chemistry, to build up that relationship, so they share that exchange of information, because information in the security industry is absolute power, and if you've got that, you can then plan the best.
Chemistry between the bodyguard and the princess was good enough for even Diana's young sons to begin treating him like family, especially after their parents separated.
When William was at school, there was the father's race. Well, of course, there was no father around. So William says, oh, you can be Papa and you can run for father's race. So Diana says, yeah, you've got to do it now. So I sort of secretly hand over my gun to my colleague, take my jacket off, and then take part in the father's race.
Wharf also helped Diana get the princess some decidedly unroyal meals.
When William and Harry finished their school, she would say, look, do you want to go and have a McDonald's? So we literally sort of walk down the road here and sort of pitch up a McDonald's. Diana wanted William and Harry to see what other people did. It was her way of breaking them into what she would refer to as normality.
Guarding the royals gets trickier when they're being a danger to themselves. Diana sometimes took risks with the attitude that staff could sort things out and that she could get away with anything.
I noticed that Diana's speed was reaching 90 miles an hour, which is 20 miles over the legal limit. And I said, what's your speed, ma'am? She said, well, you'll take care of it if anything happens. I said, well, no, actually. I said, you'll have to take care of it. And almost immediately, I got a signal from my backup car to say, we think there's an unmarked police car approaching. And by sheer coincidence, this car did arrive. And this guy said, well, realizing who it was, said, oh, well, I'll let you do that. I said, no, you deal with it. It's your responsibility. And he gave her this lecture and essentially said, look,
You know, I'm giving you an official caution on this occasion. The great thing about the policeman's role is that, of course, we were not employed by Her Majesty. We could be honest and actually say things that they actually didn't like listening to. If anything did go disastrously wrong, I always had another job to go back to.
If Scotland Yard could get away with speaking truth to royalty, that would be risky business for anyone like a butler.
The only one thing you must always remember is that the royal family may not always be right, but they're never wrong.
Paul Burrell was full-time with the Princess of Wales now that she and Charles no longer lived together.
Princess's life wasn't easy. She had no one she could confide in. So often I was the punching bag. Often I got caught in the crossfire.
But the butler's devotion was unflagging, and he knew his way around his mistress.
Diana succumbed to flattery, and I think that Burrell was a bit of a superstar at flattering the princess.
Burrell put in long hours for his boss, especially when she needed him to facilitate nighttime rendezvous.
It was my duty to go out in the middle of the night and ferry back people whom she wanted to be with in the boot of my car. My car. On one occasion, I did pick up someone as Kentucky Fried Chicken. Kensington Palace wasn't that secure in those days. I had a routine. Halfway down the drive, I would flash my lights, the police would lift the barrier, and I would speed through. I never stopped. And I deposited my charge at a back door.
A slight movement at an upstairs window told the butler another palace occupant knew exactly what was going on.
On many occasions, a twitching curtain and Princess Margaret, the Queen's sister, would be peeping. On one occasion, the princess, meeting her lover at the back door, waved and said, "Good night, Margot."
As Diana's life spun out of control, her behavior became more bizarre, including a newfound concern for London's sex trade workers. Once again, she pressed her butler into special service.
I was sent out to give these ladies who were plying their trade on the streets of London £50 notes. And the princess's instructions would be, tell them to go home. Of course, they didn't go home. They stayed out all night. But in her way, she was helping. So with a fistful of £50 notes, I tried to stop the prostitution trade in London.
When Diana wanted her growing boys to get a better view of the opposite sex, she put it on Burrell's to-do list.
The princess thought it'd be interesting for them to see some ladies. I was charged sometimes of going to the local newsagent and looking on the top shelf for a favorite publication. I didn't really care how she treated me in the long term because I was only doing my job.
Burrell's job description knew no bounds, once including the work of an undertaker. Diana asked him to dig a 6-foot-deep grave for her friend's miscarried baby in the walled garden at Kensington Palace.
As we dug that grave, I said to the princess, "Are you sure this is all right?" She said, "Well, do you know, I'm not sure, but I know it's the best thing to do." I said, "Have you told the Queen you're doing this? Because this is her garden. It's Crown property." She said, "No, I haven't told the Queen. I don't think she'd understand."
Royals do what they want, when they want, even if their most trusted advisors tell them it'll end in disaster. As the highest-ranking aide to Princess Diana, Cambridge-educated Patrick Jeffson saw danger looming for his boss.
The art of giving advice includes knowing when your advice is not going to be taken, and then you have to switch to a different art, which is damage control.
The private secretary had plenty of damage to control as Charles and Diana indulged in extramarital relationships in their country house, all witnessed by their servants.
They knew exactly what was going on, the servants, because they were the ones making up the beds. There's no doubt that they did used to listen at doorways. There was 1 or 2 occasions when the doors were slamming and then Prince Charles would walk out and there'd be 3 or 4 servants just outside, almost knocked over as he walked past them.
The conflict escalated when Charles crushed his wife by openly admitting to adultery in a BBC documentary. Diana's private secretary advised her to turn the other cheek.
The thing that would make her look semi-divine would have been to forgive, publicly hold out a hand of reconciliation to the rest of the royal family.
But Diana was out for vengeance. Secretly, she taped an interview with the BBC about her marriage. Jeffson was stunned when he heard it was soon to be broadcast.
I would have done anything to get that interview pulled because I felt that it was so damaging to her own future interests. She didn't want me to see it. She didn't want her lawyers to see it. She didn't want anything to be known in advance about it.
Watched by nearly half the country, the Princess of Wales made a frontal assault on her husband. She admitted to cheating on Charles, questioned his ability to be king, and intimated that the crown should pass directly to their son, William. The interview was an embarrassment to the royal family, and the Queen demanded the couple divorce. Diana was stripped of her title, and her private secretary resigned.
It was disappointing to see so much damage being done to her own position by her own actions.
Royal servants have been having a tough time for centuries. No one envied the job of the chamber pot maid. And just about any female servant was prey for her master. But the royal food taster had it worse. He risked dying in agony if anybody tried to poison the king. Even the position of lady-in-waiting could be dangerous. Anne Boleyn was one until she was briefly promoted to Henry VIII's wife. But the king moved on to somebody else and had Anne beheaded. Reporter Ryan Perry wondered how bad it was to be a royal servant these days when his paper asked him to get the inside story on the palace. With surprising ease, he bluffed his way into a footman's job and got so close to the monarch that he managed to take shocking pictures of her breakfast table.
The last person you would expect to be using Tupperware is Her Majesty the Queen.
Then he snapped Prince Edward's teddy bears.
I think they were dubbed Eddie's Teddies.
And documented Carpe Diem philosophy in Prince Andrew's living quarters.
There was a cushion on one of the chairs which said, "Eat, drink, and remarry."
Less amusing for Perry was experiencing the almost feudal class structure in the palace, where knowing your place is everything.
You are a servant to people of higher calling, and you have to behave in a subservient manner.
There are strict rules for everything.
Staff weren't allowed to walk down the centre of the carpets because of course, we'd wear them out. The centre of the carpet was restricted for the royal family.
Perry was reprimanded once for breaking china, but never got a dressing down like a fellow footman who fumbled a task he was assigned by Princess Anne.
She looked at him and said, "You incompetent twat."
In a rigidly hierarchical system, disdain at the top has a way of percolating down through the staff. Perry was shocked to find himself having to kowtow to a high-ranking assistant to the Queen.
He clearly felt servants weren't human beings on his level. I was required to shine his shoes, steam and iron his jacket and shirts, and to polish his sword. He wouldn't say hello, he wouldn't say please, thank you. The way he treated his staff was appalling, really.
Even some of Perry's downstairs colleagues enjoyed putting the newbie in his place.
There certainly was a lot of cattiness.
After collecting 2 months' worth of notes on the bizarre world of royal servants and the lax process of vetting them, Perry was happy to take leave of the palace. Room and board at the poshest address in the UK didn't quite make up for a menial job paying just $18,000 per year.
The salary was way too low. The hours were extremely long. No, it's not a job I would recommend to other people.
But there's never any lack of applicants when the palace advertises even the humblest positions. That's a bit depressing for one of Britain's staunchest anti-monarchists.
Why do people want to be servants for this feudal aristocratic family? That indeed is indicative of a very deferential culture that believes that these people are born to rule, which is, of course, completely out of step with the modern democratic meritocratic ethos of mainstream Britain.
Deference and devotion were the very hallmarks of William Tallon, the Queen Mother's treasured page of the backstairs.
He said once, the people that were most important to him in his life were his parents and the Queen Mother. So, you know, he worshipped her.
But backstairs Billy was about to find out just how cold the Windsors can be when it's time to say goodbye. After nearly half a century of service to Queen Elizabeth, Billy made a tragic misstep on her 101st birthday.
Billy did used to sort of play to the camera, and he probably wanted to make sure he was in the shot, but I think he probably didn't realise quite what was going to happen.
Billy trundled out his boss's daughter in a wheelchair.
Princess Margaret looked absolutely terrible.
The paparazzi had a feeding frenzy.
The photographers were taking photographs of the Queen and Queen Mother. Certainly everything was on Princess Margaret, and they were taking photographs from her feet, which were bloated, her ankles were bloated. These big black glasses were covering her eyes, and she looked very, very sick. The press were quite shocked.
Everybody was very cross about it, and it certainly played into the hands of his enemies. But his version of it, at any rate, was that Princess Margaret insisted on coming out.
The Queen, said to be furious, ordered that Billy never be left alone with her mother again.
Some of the royals didn't actually ever forgive Billy.
Both Princess Margaret and the Queen Mother were dead in less than a year. Billy had lost his protector, and the knives came out.
Pretty much a matter of weeks after she passed away, the rest of the family just said, "It's time for you to go, Billy." He was moved out of his cottage, which he thought he would keep, into a flat in Kennington, which was really not a patch on what he had before. And he was very sad in his final years.
Billy was pursued relentlessly by the tabloids.
He many times told me that he'd been offered sums beyond belief to tell his story to somebody and spill all the beans. He did not do that.
The former servant received no reward for his loyalty. He partied hard and drank heavily, as he'd always done. At the end of one long night, Billy stopped by his local pub for more drinks. Stumbling out into the dark, he collapsed in the street. A paparazzo was there to record his fall.
He got very depressed by that, and he didn't go out for several days.
5 years after Billy was sent packing by the royals, a neighbor found him dead in his apartment.
I think he was very sad because he felt a little bit betrayed, but one should not really feel like that, because at the end of the day, the royal family are fairly detached emotionally when it comes to these sort of things. And 1 minute you're there, next minute you're gone and you're replaced by somebody else.
Paul Burrell had it even worse than Billy when Diana was no longer there to protect him. In 2001, he was arrested and hauled into court, accused of stealing more than 300 of the princess's possessions. The case lasted nearly 2 years, and then was suddenly dismissed. The Queen recalled a conversation she'd had with the butler in which he'd mentioned to her that he was taking care of some of Diana's things. Saddled with huge legal bills, Burrell defied the monarchy's edict of silence with his tell-all memoir, A Royal Duty. It sold more than 2 million copies.
He is absolutely persona non grata within the royal household, so he's regarded as the enemy and will never, ever be forgiven.
One staffer who stayed in the royal family's good books even though she fell out with Princess Diana is Tiggy Pettifer. The former nanny to William and Harry after their parents separated now runs a bed and breakfast in Wales near her family's 6,000-acre estate and never talks to the media.
Diana hated Tiggy. She did everything with the boys. She took them on holiday, she looked after them, they stayed at her family's house. It became a very intimate relationship. Harry adored Tiggy. One of his favourite things to do was to crawl on her lap and suck his thumb and fall asleep on her.
Princess Diana became increasingly jealous, not just of her husband's dependency on Tiggy, but also on the way she began to increasingly influence the lives of Prince William and Harry. What she hated most of all was the fact that Tiggy's picture was in the papers almost as much as hers.
Tiggy certainly didn't endear herself to the princess when she referred to William and Harry as my babies.
It was like a red rag to a bull for Diana.
The Princess of Wales approached Tiggy at a staff party and intimated, in a loud voice, that the nanny had aborted Charles's baby. The depth of Diana's paranoia was only revealed years later when a letter she gave to her butler was made public at her inquest. My husband is planning an accident in my car, she wrote. brake failure and serious head injury in order to make the path clear for him to marry Tiggy. Camilla is nothing but a decoy. But history proved that Camilla was the real thing for Charles, and that Tiggy the nanny was likely just doing her job.
She looked after his children, and she looked after them as if they were her own, and that's what made her very special.
In retrospect, Diana needed a bit of looking after herself. But royal hubris led her to ignore the advice of one of her most trusted servants just before he quit.
I said, ma'am, you know, the only one thing I would tell you to do is, for the rest of your life, don't give up your security. You're going to need this sort of protection.
But Diana knew better, eventually dismissing her elite Scotland Yard crew and inheriting her new boyfriend's dubious private bodyguards.
This is what's left of the Mercedes in which the Princess of Wales and her companion, Dodi Al-Fayed, were being driven back to his house.
Ken Wharf is stunned to be called back for his last royal assignment.
I'm in charge of security here, and this Abby behind me, at her own funeral. The security didn't tell her to put the seatbelt on. The security didn't tell the driver to slow down. The security didn't tell the driver, hey, you shouldn't be driving anyway because you've had too much to drink. This was a car crash that could and should have been avoided.
People born to rule are loath to accept advice, even when it's from Scotland Yard determined to save them from a mob. Thousands of students rioting over tuition fee increases in central London weren't enough to persuade the future king that he shouldn't drive to the theatre by his favorite route.
His security personnel advised him to take a different route, but as per usual with Prince Charles, he knew best, of course, and insisted on going the way he'd always gone to the theatre, and the car was surrounded by rioters. It could have been a very, very dangerous moment.
The royals' car was hit by bottles, paint cans, and even garbage bins. A stick was shoved through an open window into the Duchess of Cornwall's ribs. The incident left Diana's former bodyguard shaking his head that Charles felt so above the concerns of people paid to protect him.
That situation could have been incredibly serious. He's saying, well, you know, what can go wrong here? It did go wrong, and the protection team were virtually powerless to do anything about it. What can you do in this situation?
Before he got married, Prince William's desire for freedom and distrust of servants made motorbiking one of his favorite pastimes. No chauffeur needed. No hired help was required either when, on his gap year in Chile, the prince became the first Windsor in history to be filmed cleaning a toilet. His brother Harry has shown a bit of spit and polish too.
There is a wonderful piece of footage of Harry cleaning his own boots and Charles making some comment that they're not very good. And he said, well, I haven't got 30 servants or something like you to clean my boots. I have to do it myself.
I always clean them.
The Princess of Wales drummed a lot of good things into her sons, and the need for having servants is not necessarily one of them.
But can Kate and William do their own thing once they make Kensington Palace their home?
Absolutely impossible. They're not going to answer the front door themselves, are they? I mean, surely not. It's not going to happen. Who's going to clean the silver? I can't see Prince William polishing his brass buttons on his scarlet tunic. Kate can't be washing and ironing and pressing her dress before she goes on an engagement. It's not going to happen.
When the family expands, the nursery is going to have to be staffed. It will not only have nurses and nannies, but it will also have protection. It will also have its own kitchen, so it'll need its own chef and its own kitchen staff. So it'll probably need about another 9 or 10 people working there just for the baby.
Practicality aside, royals without chauffeurs, valets, and nannies might look too ordinary for the monarchy's good.
This is an unelected institution which relies upon popularity for its survival. If they don't sort of cut the mustard, will people necessarily want to keep them? So I think they have to keep up their standards.
Charles, first in line to the throne, certainly isn't lowering his.
He really does live in a far grander way than the Queen and the Duke of Edinburgh, surrounded by these flunkies all over the place.
William may be forced to follow suit.
It comes with the territory. And unless he goes in and makes a lot of people redundant, which is going to be bad press, Prince William will eventually adopt the same sort of levels that his father has now.
Some palace observers say the Duke of Cambridge is becoming increasingly at ease with the trappings of monarchy and the servants which go with them. He's even started to accumulate his own circle of flunkies, now forbidden to call him William.
As he's become older and the hair started to recede, he's begun to assume one or two characteristics of his father, so his staff now all call him Sir and Your Royal Highness. Although he's more informal than his father, they're not ready yet to go down the Dutch royal family route where allegedly the Queen rides a bike.
So peddling into the future is not an option for King William and his Queen Kate. They'll likely get there Windsor style in a chauffeur-driven Bentley.